He believed wealth meant safety, he believed success could not disappear, and then one morning, a single headline proved him wrong. This story begins in the early years of the 20th century when ambition still felt clean and the future seemed endless. The man was named Walter Haynes. He was born in Ohio, raised with discipline, taught that effort created destiny. He learned numbers early, he learned timing. By 30 he had built a shipping business, small at first, then growing fast. Trains moved his goods, ports welcomed his name, banks trusted his smile. Walter wore simple suits but expensive watches. He spoke calmly, people listened, success followed him quietly. He married a woman named Eleanor Brooks. She admired his focus. Their home stood on a hill, windows wide, mornings bright, parties polite, guests confident, laughter measured. Walter believed progress was permanent. The nation felt the same. Factories expanded, streets filled, money moved quickly. Walter invested everywhere, steel, rail, real estate. Each decision felt right. Numbers went up, papers praised growth, friends called him visionary. He kept working, waking early, trusting systems, trusting markets, trusting tomorrow. Years passed smoothly, prosperity became normal, caution felt unnecessary. Walter began borrowing to expand faster, banks encouraged him, interest felt harmless, contracts grew thick, responsibilities heavier, yet confidence stayed firm. He told Eleanor that stability was guaranteed. She nodded, though sometimes silent. Distant storms were ignored, warnings dismissed as fear, headlines remained positive. The country danced forward, unaware of the edge approaching, and Walter stood near that edge smiling without knowing it, believing wealth was a fixed state not a fragile moment. Decision needed. Confirm whether to continue with part 2 under the same rules within the next reply. Walter Haynes entered the late 1920s like a man walking into sunlight. He expanded the fleet, he bought warehouses, he signed papers that seemed like doors opening, he hired managers, he trusted their reports, he trusted the rhythm of trade. Every month looked stronger than the last, and every new deal felt like proof that the world rewarded boldness. Eleanor watched him become busier. His voice stayed calm but his eyes worked faster. He rarely rested, he rarely sat without planning. He spoke of new routes, new machines, new lenders, and he believed that scale was safety. He held dinners with bankers, men with neat hair and careful laughter. They raised glasses, they praised efficiency, they spoke about modern times, about how the old cycles were gone, about how markets had learned balance. Walter listened and agreed, because agreement made the night smoother, and because the numbers had trained him to believe. Then came small signs. A delayed payment here, a quiet rumor there, a partner who asked for more time, a newspaper line that sounded odd. Walter shrugged. He had seen delays before, he had seen rumors before, he had seen fear that faded. He told his team to push forward, to ship faster, to buy more inventory, to lock in contracts. He even bought a tall building in Chicago, a symbol to place his name among the permanent. Eleanor asked him one evening why he looked tired. He said it was just growth. He said growth always feels heavy for a moment. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. Still she started saving small things. She kept letters, she kept receipts, she kept a quiet list of who owed what. Walter did not notice. He was already focused on the next week, the next quarter, the next announcement. The city around them sounded bright. Jazz spilled into streets, shops glowed late, new cars passed like sleek promises, men spoke about fortunes as if they were weather. Everyone thought the sky would stay clear. Then in the fall the air changed, not with thunder, but with a strange silence. Phones rang more often, meetings lasted longer, smiles took effort. One banker avoided Walter's eyes, another asked questions that felt sharper. Walter answered smoothly. He brought charts, he brought confidence, he said the core business was strong, he said demand would return, he said transport was the bloodstream of the nation, and the men nodded, but the nods looked thinner. And on a morning that began like any other, Walter opened the paper and felt his stomach tighten, because the headline did not sound like a normal headline. It sounded like a door slamming, it sounded like a crowd holding its breath. He folded the paper slowly, he stared at the window, and for the first time in many years he did not feel certain about tomorrow. Walter went downtown before the streets fully woke. He wanted facts, not panic. He entered the office where clerks usually smiled, now they whispered. He asked for the latest figures, he asked for the bank lines, he asked for the shipping orders. Pages arrived with numbers that looked wrong, not impossible, just wrong in a new way, values falling without reason, buyers waiting without promise, lenders calling without warmth. Walter told himself it was a temporary shock. He repeated that phrase. Like a tool, temporary shock, temporary shock. He called his main banker, a man named Charles Morrow. Charles answered with a careful tone. He spoke about uncertainty, he spoke about pressure, he spoke about protecting deposits. Walter listened, then asked directly about credit. Charles paused, then said limits were being reviewed. Walter heard the pause as a warning. He ended the call politely, then stared at the receiver as if it had lied. He called other contacts, one did not pick up. Another sounded rushed, another offered sympathy instead of support. That was new. Sympathy felt like a lock. By noon the market news grew darker, people crowded sidewalks, messengers ran, offices shut their doors, rumors thickened. Some said it would recover by Friday, others said this was the beginning of something deeper. Walter returned home late. Eleanor met him in the hallway. She saw his face. She did not ask for details at first, she simply offered tea. He sat, he held the cup but did not drink. Then he told her there was trouble. He used that soft word, trouble. Eleanor nodded. She asked what they should do. Walter said they should stay calm. He said their assets were solid. He said their business was real. He said they moved goods that people needed. But the next days did not calm. They tightened. Banks shortened terms. Insurers raised costs. Clients canceled orders. Warehouses filled with goods that no longer had buyers. Walter walked through his main dock and heard the creak of idle cranes. He watched workers stand in small groups, waiting, hoping. He felt their eyes on him. He hated that feeling. He hated being the man who must speak. He gathered his managers. He told them to cut spending, to delay purchases, to hold cash. But cash was already running thin, because cash was tied to loans, and loans were tied to confidence, and confidence was leaving like water down a drain. Walter tried to sell the Chicago building. Buyers offered far less than it had cost. He refused at first, pride refused, then reality insisted. He sold anyway. The sale did not solve the debt, it only slowed the fall. Each week a new letter arrived. Each letter sounded more formal, more cold, more final. Walter began waking at night, listening to the house, hearing the ticking of a clock as if it counted loss. Eleanor stayed steady. She spoke gently. She reminded him of smaller days, of starting with one truck, one route, one contract. Walter nodded, but his mind stayed trapped in the scale he had built, because when a man grows used to large numbers, small numbers feel like defeat. And the depression did not arrive like a single storm, it arrived like a season that refused to end. Month after month, jobs vanished, markets sank, people stopped spending, and the nation that had seemed invincible now looked tired. Walter walked through the city and saw lines outside banks, lines outside factories, faces that had learned worry. He returned to his office and saw his own name on documents that now read like threats, and he began to understand that wealth was not only money, it was belief, and belief was breaking everywhere. The start of the new year. Walter Haynes no longer counted success in profit but in survival. Every morning he reviewed debts, he marked deadlines, he crossed out options that no longer existed. The business shrank fast, routes were cut, warehouses closed, trusted employees were called into quiet rooms and given careful words. Walter looked each of them in the eye, he thanked them, he promised references. Some nodded with dignity, others with disbelief. The weight of those moments followed him. Home, Eleanor packed fewer meals. The house felt larger and emptier. Rooms once filled with voices now echoed. Walter sold furniture, then art, then the second car. Each sale felt like peeling away layers of a former self. Neighbors noticed, conversations shortened, invitations stopped, not from cruelty but from discomfort. Prosperity had been the language of friendship, and now that language was gone. Walter sought new financing. He traveled to New York. He walked through tall buildings that once welcomed him. Now guards checked his name twice. Offices felt colder. Men spoke in cautious phrases. They offered restructuring, they offered delays, but not rescue. Walter returned home with papers that extended the fall but did not stop it. One evening he and Eleanor sat at the table with ledgers spread wide, numbers lined up like soldiers on a losing field. Eleanor asked what would happen if everything failed. Walter paused. He had avoided that sentence. He finally said they would adjust, they would live smaller, they would endure. The word endure sounded unfamiliar to him. Months passed, creditors pressed harder, a major bank demanded payment, assets were no longer enough, legal letters arrived, formal and exact. Walter read them slowly, understanding each line, accepting each meaning. The company that had taken years to build unraveled in weeks, contracts dissolved, partnerships ended. His name was removed from directories, offices closed. The final day came quietly. No crowd, no announcement, just a signature. Walter walked out carrying a single box. Inside were ledgers, a photograph, and a pen he had used since the beginning. Outside the city moved on, people hurried, newsboys shouted, life continued without noticing his fall. The house on the hill could no longer be kept, they sold it below value, moved into a small rented place near the tracks. The sound of trains at night reminded Walter of what he once commanded. Eleanor took work sewing, then clerical tasks. Walter searched for positions, but employers saw his past as a risk, not a benefit. A man who had failed carried invisible weight. Weeks turned into months, savings vanished, routines changed, meals simplified, pride softened. The loss was not only material, it was identity. Walter was no longer the man people deferred to, he was a man waiting in lines, filling forms, standing among others with the same tired eyes. He felt shame at first, then something else, a strange quiet. Because when everything is taken, the noise of ambition fades, and in that silence he began to notice things he had ignored, the patience of Eleanor, the kindness of strangers, the value of a single day without new loss. The depression pressed on, but Walter no longer measured time in expansion, he measured it in resilience, learning slowly that collapse does not end a life, it only strips it to essentials. Walter learned the rhythm of poverty the way he had once learned markets, slowly and with resistance. Mornings began early again, not for planning growth but for searching opportunity. He read notice boards, he spoke to foremen, he offered his hands, his experience, his reliability. Some listened, most declined. Factories were closing, offices were shrinking, men younger and cheaper stood beside him in lines. Walter adjusted his expectations. He took temporary work, loading crates, recording inventories, anything that paid by the day. His hands roughened, his back ached, yet the work grounded him. It demanded presence not prediction. Eleanor managed their small apartment with care, she budgeted precisely, she repaired clothing, she smiled more often than before, not from happiness but from strength. They spoke in the evenings about ordinary things, about weather, about neighbors, about small plans. Walter stopped reading business pages, he read human stories instead, notices of lost jobs, of families moving west, of communities sharing resources. He saw himself reflected in those lines. The city around them changed character, grand shops boarded windows, street musicians played for coins, soup kitchens appeared quietly. Walter volunteered when he could, not from charity but from understanding. He met men who had owned companies, farms, newspapers, all reduced to the same status. Introductions became simple, names only, past titles irrelevant. This equality felt strange but honest. One winter was especially cold, work grew scarce, meals lighter. Walter and Eleanor shared silence often, not uncomfortable silence but thoughtful. They had learned how little was needed to feel together. Pride no longer blocked gratitude. When a neighbor shared bread, Walter thanked him fully. When Eleanor earned a small raise, they celebrated with coffee. Life compressed, but it also clarified. Walter reflected on his rise and fall. He saw how confidence had turned into certainty, how certainty had blinded caution. He did not blame himself entirely, nor did he blame fate. He accepted the mixture of choice and circumstance. This acceptance brought calm. He began teaching bookkeeping at a local center, unpaid at first, then modestly paid. Young men listened. He taught them not only numbers but restraint, not only ambition but balance. His voice steadied again, not commanding but sincere. The past no longer haunted him as sharply, it informed him. The depression continued its slow grind, but within that pressure Walter rebuilt something smaller and more durable, a sense of worth not tied to scale, a respect for limits, a belief that dignity survives loss. And though he never regained his former wealth, he gained a quieter richness, one that did not depend on markets or praise, one that stayed with him through each uncertain morning, and that was enough to keep walking forward. As the years moved forward the nation adjusted to hardship, and so did Walter. The sharp shock of loss dulled into a steady pressure. He and Eleanor found a routine that worked, modest but stable. Mornings began with purpose again. Walter prepared lessons, Eleanor left for her office work, evenings were shared over simple meals, conversation returned to plans, small plans, but real ones. Walter became known at the community center, not as a former magnate but as a patient teacher. His students trusted him, they asked questions, they stayed late. He saw curiosity replace fear in their eyes. That gave him quiet pride. The city also began to heal in pieces, some factories reopened, some streets regained light. Progress was slow and uneven, but visible. Walter was offered a permanent position teaching accounting and logistics. The pay was modest, the stability valuable. He accepted without hesitation. Responsibility felt different now, lighter, clearer, without illusion. He taught caution, he taught preparation, he taught respect for uncertainty. Eleanor noticed a change in him, his sleep improved, his laughter returned softly. He no longer chased recognition, he valued consistency. They saved small amounts, they planned carefully. The past wealth became a story not a wound. Sometimes young men asked Walter about his former life, about ships and buildings. He answered honestly, without pride or bitterness. He explained how success can narrow vision, how growth can hide fragility. These lessons mattered more than formulas. Seasons passed, the depression loosened its grip slowly, opportunities appeared cautiously. Walter declined offers that felt rushed. He chose stability, he chose balance. The world had taught him patience. One spring day he walked by the old docks, now quieter, smaller. He watched ships load steadily, without spectacle. He felt no envy, only respect for the work continuing. Eleanor joined him, they stood together, remembering without pain. The city was different, and so were they. Wealth had once defined Walter's identity, now character did, and that change felt permanent. The future remained uncertain, but fear no longer ruled it. Walter had learned that value could be built more than once, not always with money, but with integrity, service, and restraint. And as the country slowly stepped into recovery, he stepped with it, not ahead, not behind, but in rhythm with reality. Time continued its steady movement, and Walter no longer tried to outrun it. The nation entered a cautious recovery, confidence returned slowly, like a muscle learning movement again. Businesses reopened with humility, banks spoke with restraint. Walter watched these changes with measured interest. He advised former students who started small ventures, he reviewed plans, he asked difficult questions, he encouraged patience. His guidance carried weight because it was earned through loss. Eleanor advanced in her work, trusted for her reliability. Their household remained modest, but comfortable. Evenings were filled with reading, discussion, reflection. The noise of ambition never returned, and Walter did not miss it. One summer he was invited to speak at a local forum on economic lessons. He hesitated, then agreed. He spoke without drama, without numbers meant to impress. He spoke about responsibility, about limits, about remembering that systems depend on people. The audience listened closely, some nodded, some took notes. Afterward a young man thanked him, saying the talk changed how he viewed success. That moment mattered more than any past applause. The city rebuilt itself piece by piece, not taller, but wiser. Walter noticed fewer excesses, more caution. The memory of collapse lingered in architecture and habits. This restraint felt healthy. He and Eleanor moved to a slightly larger apartment. Still near the tracks, the sound of trains remained familiar, comforting now. A reminder of endurance. Walter kept his old pen on his desk, the one from his former office, not as regret but as perspective. Sometimes he wrote letters to himself, thoughts about humility, about listening, about measuring life beyond gain. He never sent them, but the act mattered. Age brought gentleness. He mentored without authority, he corrected without judgment. His past no longer defined him, it informed him. When people spoke of the Depression as history, Walter understood its personal cost, and its quiet gifts. It had stripped away illusion, leaving truth. He did not wish those years on anyone, but he honored what they taught, that security is fragile, that dignity is internal, that success without awareness is temporary. And as the world moved forward, Walter walked with calm, no longer driven by accumulation, but guided by meaning. The later years arrived without urgency. Walter welcomed them. His days followed a gentle order, teaching in the mornings, advising in the afternoons, walking with Eleanor in the evenings. The city felt familiar again, not as a place of conquest but as a shared home. Younger generations filled the streets, unaware of how fragile prosperity could be. Walter did not preach, he modeled restraint. When asked about ambition he spoke of preparation, when asked about risk he spoke of responsibility. His reputation grew quietly, not in newspapers but in trust. Eleanor's health remained steady, they supported each other with ease born of experience, they had weathered loss together, which made small challenges manageable. Sometimes they visited the old neighborhood on the hill, not to mourn, but to acknowledge distance. Walter felt no bitterness, only clarity, that life changes shape many times, and resistance only deepens pain. He wrote occasional essays for local publications, reflections on economics and ethics, written simply, grounded in lived reality. Readers responded, letters arrived thanking him for honesty. This connection mattered. The Depression had taught him that voices grounded in experience endure longer than those built on optimism alone. The country now spoke of progress again, but more carefully. Systems were regulated, language softened, memory still guided decisions. Walter approved of this caution. He saw it as maturity, not fear. One autumn he received an offer to consult for a growing firm. The pay was generous, the prestige tempting. He considered it, then declined. He preferred independence, he preferred balance. Eleanor supported the choice. They valued peace over scale. The years continued, hair grayed, steps slowed, yet purpose remained intact. Walter understood now that legacy is not measured in structures or wealth, but in influence quietly passed forward, in lessons absorbed by others, in lives steadied by example. And this understanding brought contentment deeper than anything he had known before. As age settled in, Walter felt time differently. Days felt shorter, moments fuller. He retired from formal teaching, but not from guidance. Former students visited, bringing questions, updates, gratitude. He listened more than he spoke, offering thoughts only when needed. Eleanor enjoyed quieter mornings. They tended small routines together, reading, walking, sharing memories without regret. The world beyond them continued to change. New industries rose, new risks appeared. Walter watched with interest, not anxiety. He trusted cycles now, he trusted resilience. Sometimes he reflected on the man he had been, confident, driven, certain. He did not judge that man harshly, he understood him. Ambition had been honest, just incomplete. The Depression had not destroyed him, it had refined him. This thought brought peace. One evening he organized old papers, ledgers yellowed, contracts obsolete. He kept only a few items, a photograph, the pen, a notebook of lessons learned. The rest he let go. The act felt symbolic, releasing weight he no longer needed. Eleanor watched quietly, understanding the moment. Health became a consideration, pace slowed further, but gratitude deepened. Walter appreciated ordinary stability, warm rooms, reliable meals, honest conversation. He no longer measured life by achievement, but by alignment between values and actions. This alignment felt like success at last. When asked about the Depression by younger people, he spoke plainly. He described loss, uncertainty, adaptation. He emphasized that recovery is not a return, but a transformation. Those words stayed with listeners. Walter saw it in their expressions. The nation remembered the Depression as hardship, but Walter remembered it as a teacher, harsh, unforgiving, yet clarifying. And as his days settled into simplicity, he felt no unfinished business, only gratitude for having learned before it was too late. The final years arrived quietly, without drama. Walter accepted them with the same calm he had learned long ago. Mornings were slower, but still intentional. He read, he wrote short notes, he watched the light change through the window. Eleanor remained beside him, their conversation simple and warm, filled with shared understanding. The world outside continued its endless motion, new headlines, new hopes, new fears. Walter observed without attachment. He had lived through certainty and collapse, through excess and absence, and he knew now that life moves in waves, not lines. One afternoon a former student visited, now successful, steady, thoughtful. He thanked Walter for lessons that had shaped his choices. Walter listened, then smiled. That moment felt complete. Later that evening he sat with Eleanor, the sound of trains passing softly in the distance, familiar and reassuring. He spoke about the journey, not with sadness, but with clarity. He said he once believed wealth was proof of worth, then believed loss was failure, but learned that character remains when both arrive and leave. Eleanor held his hand. She had always known this truth. In the days that followed Walter rested more, spoke less, but his presence remained strong. When his time came it was peaceful, without fear, without struggle. He left no empire, no headlines, but he left something quieter and stronger. A line of people who carried his lessons forward, an example of dignity after loss, of balance after ambition, of meaning found beyond money, and long after the Depression became a chapter in history, the impact of one man who learned to live wisely after losing everything continued, unseen but enduring, like a steady rhythm beneath the noise of the world.